Welcome to the program on negotiation at Harvard Law School's live from PON session. Today's talk will be with Sheila Heen and Douglas Stone. Their topic is learning from feedback without losing your mind. My name's Susan Hackley, and I'm delighted to welcome you on behalf of the program on negotiation. This talk will be recorded and will be posted in a few days to the PON website. During the session, please mute your microphone so we don't hear any background noise. There'll be time during the session to ask questions. Our facilitators, Diane Long and Anna Chang, will help direct the question and answer session. Now, I am happy to introduce today's presenters, Sheila Heen and Doug Stone. Sheila and Doug teach negotiation at Harvard Law School, and they've been leaders in developing the field of negotiation and teaching negotiation. They are co-authors of two best-selling books, Difficult Conversations, How to Discuss What Matters Most, and Thanks for the Feedback. They help people around the world deal productively with conflict, and we're delighted to have them with us today, sharing their ideas with you. Welcome to Live from PON, Doug and Sheila.
Thank you, Susan, and welcome to everybody. So I am told that we have people from over 80 different countries. We're starting to see them show up in the chat, but please do toss your name and a hello and where you are joining us from into the chat. There's just such a sense of connection, oddly. We're connecting virtually, but many of us are in similar circumstances right now, and we're each joining often from home. I know we are all dialing in from home. And I think part of the opportunity we want to grab this afternoon is to connect and take a few minutes to reflect on feedback. So we're going to talk about feedback generally, feedback in our professional lives, feedback in our personal lives. And here and there, there's a chance, and particularly in the Q&A, to talk about what is the impact actually for conversations about feedback, given that we're in a virtual environment, in most cases with our professional colleagues, at least at the moment. But there's also a lot of feedback happening at my house. I don't know if that's true for you, but as I am quarantined with my loved ones, loved maybe being past tense occasionally. I used to love you, right now you're annoying me. The question of feedback, I think, is definitely a hot topic for us to all struggle with. So what Doug and I wanted to do is just to give you a quick hit of some of what we've learned about feedback. A special welcome to those of you who have joined us in person in the past. It's great to see you back. And some of this will be review for you, but it'll be interesting to kind of reflect on in the moment that we're in. So let me just say a couple of words about where this stuff comes from. By the way, I'm going to kick this off. I'm going to turn it over to Doug shortly. Hi, Doug.
Hello. Hi, everybody.
Doug is going to be running the slides for us, and then we will turn it over to Q&A about halfway through. So let's talk a little bit about where this stuff comes from. As many of you know, like 20 years ago or something, when I was 12, we published a book called Difficult Conversations, and we have spent a majority of our professional careers helping leaders and others wrestle with the difficult conversations in our lives. And feedback is a difficult conversation that comes up a lot, whether you're on the giving side of feedback, like, I don't know how to talk to this person about this, or at work, we don't give each other honest feedback, we're not candid with each other, or on the receiving side, like, I'm not getting the feedback that I want, or I'm getting too much feedback and not the kind that I want. And that really led us to Thanks for the Feedback, and in particular, looking at sort of flipping the question on its head to look not at the challenges of giving feedback more skillfully and more clearly and more often, but actually flipping it around and thinking, well, hold on a sec, what about the challenges of receiving feedback, of taking in all of the little tips and pieces of advice and corrections and judgments that other people have about us. And what's so hard for all of us about receiving feedback from the people around us, feedback that can be formal, like performance reviews, or grades, I suppose, but more often is informal, indirect, sometimes even unspoken, like silence. Is that feedback? That's part of the challenge. Like, you're not responding to my email. What should I take from that? So let me just say a couple of things as big picture about what we have been thinking about. One is that receiving feedback, which by the way is how we drive our own learning and get better at things, sits really kind of at the junction of a couple of core human needs. Because on the one hand, we do want to learn and grow, right? If you look at the happiness research, learning and growing, achieving mastery, getting better at things, is a big piece of what makes life satisfying. It's actually maybe why you're tuning in today to spend an hour of your life on this webinar, because getting new insights into old challenges is actually fun and interesting and stimulating. And so, like, according to this, we should welcome feedback. It should feel joyous, and we should always feel grateful for it. It should feel like that gift that people are constantly telling us it is. But it doesn't always feel like a gift, and that's partly because we bump into a second human need, which is the need to be accepted and respected and maybe even loved the way we are now. And the feedback that I'm getting from the people in my life right now in the house is suggesting that how I am now is not totally okay with them, that they just want a few upgrades to my, quirks and habits and personality. And so I also think that feedback can be among the most painful experiences in our lives. And I think that this tension doesn't go away, but it helps me understand the conflicted feelings that I have about the feedback in my life, and why it is that so often in the moment, I've got a negative reaction. And I think, like, go away, I don't care, that's not true, that wouldn't work, you don't really understand what I'm trying to accomplish. I don't even like you. Should we keep going? But yet a week or a month or 10 years later, I look back and think, yeah, they were right? And I actually appreciate that they said something. It took a while for me to get to that learning. So for Doug and for me, a part of this work has really been about trying to understand the pain involved in receiving feedback and to get to the learning part a little bit faster. And also, the theory is that if we understand what's so hard about receiving feedback, we automatically become better givers, because we can anticipate the challenges and have better conversations, no matter which side of the conversation that you're on, giver or receiver. All right, one more idea, and then we'll dig into a piece of it. I mentioned that when we're getting feedback, we have sort of a triggered negative reaction. And what has been interesting for us is starting to see a pattern to those triggered reactions, that as human beings, when feedback is incoming, whatever kind it is, we tend to have three kinds of triggered reactions. The first is what we call truth triggers. Is this right or is it wrong? Is this good advice or bad advice? Would it work? Is it who I want to be or where I want to go? Is it aligned with my goals, or is it likely to get me there? What are the risks involved? So this is all about evaluating or judging the feedback itself. Second kind of trigger is a relationship trigger. And this has everything to do with who gave us the feedback. I don't like them. I don't respect them. I don't want to be like them. Who are they to tell me they're worse at this than I am? We often have a bigger reaction to the who than we do to the what. And so all feedback lives in that relationship between giver and receiver. And that's a second kind of triggered reaction to the feedback that actually is separate from the what. It has to do with the who. The last kind of triggered reaction is what we call an identity trigger. And this really has to do with the story that we each tell about who we are. And it also has to do with the way that we're wired. In the course of this research, we stumbled upon some evidence that suggests that in terms of sensitivity to feedback, like how upset do you get and how long does it take you to recover, or how happy does positive feedback make you and how long do you sustain that feeling, individual sensitivity can vary by up to 3,000%. And some of us are a little, we would call oversensitive, but they would say just highly sensitive. Oversensitive, of course, is feedback about how sensitive you should be. So some of us are at the high end of that scale in terms of being highly sensitive, and some of us are really at the low end of that scale and are undersensitive. In other words, people are trying to give you feedback and you don't even hear it because you're not paying attention, and also you don't, even if you get it, you don't remember it because you don't have much of an emotional reaction. And so it's actually harder for people to get through to you to be able to say, hey, you're having an impact on me or on the team, etc. And so what's interesting also, this talk is called Feedback and Without Losing Your Mind. Part of what we're talking about is how do I understand my own profile, and also how do I actually give feedback to the people around me who might have different profiles, and how do we coach each other on, hey, here's how you can give me feedback so that I can hear it and understand it. Now, I wonder whether we just lost Doug, and I wonder if that is feedback for me. He's decided that he doesn't want to have anything to do with this. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So I've got a backup set of slides here, and let me see if I can do that. Give me just a sec. Okay, hey Doug, I'll run the slides just in case we lose you again.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm just wondering if that was feedback to me on how well I'm doing this or poorly I'm doing this.
No, it was feedback on me to upgrade my internet connection.
There you go. All right. So here's where we are. And I'm going to turn it over to you because we'll spend kind of the balance of this sort of presentation time talking a little bit about truth triggers.
Great. Thanks, Sheila. So as Sheila says, we're going to talk about this first reason that we tend to reject feedback, which is we find fault with it. It's not true. It's outdated. It's partial. It's whatever. There's lots of reasons why we might find fault with feedback. And I want to start with a little exercise in a moment, but not yet, Sheila. We're going to put up a sentence, a comment that someone might make to someone else. And in these difficult times with the pandemic, we're having lots of challenging feedback conversations with each other that might be new to some of us, and they're raising challenging issues between us. And so this is a sentence where
Did you want it? Sorry, that was my mistake.
Yeah, you can put it up. Where is your face mask? So this is a sentence that you may have said to someone else, or someone else may have said it to you. You've certainly heard people talking about it in the media, or you may have observed people saying it. So the question is, if someone says this to you, or you say it to someone else, let's imagine someone says it to you. What are some things that the person might mean when they say, where is your face mask? So we don't know the details because it's a fictional situation. So, but just hypothetically, and you can put this in the chat if you want, what are just the kinds of things someone might be trying to get at when they make a comment like this, when they give somebody feedback, when they give you feedback, where's your face mask? Or when you give that to someone else. You don't care about others. The person thinks I'm ugly. You're not following the directions. Yeah, so there's a ton of stuff.
I'm scared.
You're not worried about getting sick. Yeah, exactly.
Why aren't you protecting yourself? You're an idiot.
So there are as many answers here as probably there are people.
That's awesome.
On this thing. So let's take a look at some of the ones that we came up with.
I think people hit upon probably all of these, but go ahead.
Exactly. Okay. You want to put up the first one, Sheila?
I thought I did.
Oh, there we go. So they say, where's your face mask? They might be talking about, why are you so forgetful? Why can't you remember the simplest things? They might just be making a comment about it's safer, particularly in specific crowded situations. Maybe it's not about the safety so much. Maybe it's just about setting a good example for others. Maybe it's just about our relationship. you know, whether or not it makes sense to wear a face mask, it makes me feel anxious when you don't, and I want you to care about that. Maybe it's about the other person. Maybe it's I'm telling you, you have a problem with authority. You don't follow rules, and we just can't afford a fine at this point. Maybe there's a political comment in there somewhere. You care more about the economy than people's health. And maybe it's just an angry judgment about the person based on very little data. You're an all-around
Maybe a
bad
lot,
person.
maybe a lot of data based on a lot
Or
of
maybe a lot of other data. Yeah, exactly. And so this is meant to illustrate, and your comments in the chat box illustrates, that when someone makes a comment like this in the form of feedback, it could mean a huge range of things. Basically saying, you're forgetful, why can't you remember things, is very different than saying, you're an all-around bad person, or you don't care about other people, or you don't love me. That's a crazy wide range of meanings that one little comment could plausibly have. And this is actually very common when we receive, excuse me, when we receive feedback, is we tend to hear it in the form of what we call labels. So let's go to the next slide. Our assumption when we're receiving feedback, which makes a lot of sense, is we're only going to take the feedback if it's right. In other words, if it seems like it's going to be helpful. If you give me feedback and I'm thinking that has nothing to do with me, or that might work for you, but it's not going to work for me, or that's way out of date, or it's just bad advice, it makes sense not to take it, right? So our pitch here isn't that you should always take feedback. Our pitch is that you should take feedback when it's useful, which makes sense. But the problem is we often reject the feedback before we actually even know what it means. So as we saw in the mask example, it can mean a whole range of things, and we might be rejecting it based on a meaning that the person who gave it to us didn't even intend. So let's take a look at the next slide. So it's useful, we found, to think of feedback as coming in the form of what we would call a label. So if you're buying something in the supermarket, and assuming it's stocked at the moment, and let's say you pick up this can on our slide here, and the can is labeled with the word label.
or soup.
Or soup. It would be strange to say, well, I don't like that stuff. Because you might be assuming that you know what's in there, right? But in fact, you might be wrong, and there might be something in there that you do like. So naturally, what you'd want to know is, well, before I can decide if I like it, I want to know what's actually in there. And that's what we want to do with feedback as well. We want to know, before I decide, does this make sense for me? Is it fair? Is it right? I want to really understand it. Let's take a look at some examples of the way feedback comes toward us. And these should sound familiar, because I think well-meaning people give and receive this kind of feedback all the time. Be customer-centric. Work on your people skills, be more socially conscious, be less arrogant, don't overthink things, show more leadership, go the extra mile, be more proactive. I have a friend, and I've spent countless hours with her on the phone trying to help her process this phrase, don't overthink it, which maybe gives you some insight into her overthinking processes. But the interesting thing is, she literally had no idea what the person was getting at. As we were brainstorming, we could think of 20 different possible ways that you could take that, and it's hard to know whether the feedback makes sense and what to do about it if you don't understand it. So step number one is recognize that a lot of feedback comes at us in this form of labels. And then the next thing we want to do is, let's take a look at the next slide. So what we want to do is we want to open up the can. We want to understand what's under the label. What does this feedback really mean? And just knowing that you want to get under the label is useful, but we want to be a little more specific than that. So there's a couple questions we want to ask. And the first one is, where's this feedback coming from? And by that, we don't mean, what are you secretly getting at here? Where are you coming from? We mean literally, when you gave me that feedback, what were you seeing? What were you thinking about in terms of my behavior? What did I say? What did I do? What did you observe? So the person giving the feedback is being asked, look to the past, look at what motivated you to give me this feedback, and try to be really specific about what that was. What were your observations, implicit rules, interpretations, etc. So first question is, where's this feedback coming from? So, and I want to, before I can figure out what to make of the feedback, I want to get a better sense of what's under that label. And then the next question is, where is this feedback going to? And by that we mean forward-looking. So you observed some behavior of mine, right? You said that I was talking too much during the meeting. And so forward-looking, what would it sound like? What would it look like? What would it be like for me to try to conform to what you're recommending? It's not just talk less, but sort of give me some examples of what it sounds like to do what you have in mind. So what specifically are you suggesting I do differently? What would that look like? And often getting a very clear picture of that really gives you a sense of partly what the feedback giver is concerned about, but also what the target is in terms of conforming your behavior to the kind of feedback that you're giving. Okay, let's, are we up to, oh, Sheila, I think I'm kicking it back to you, right? For one last slide.
Yes, you are kicking it back to me.
Great.
So partly we just wanted to wrap up this super short overview by giving everybody at least one practice. So far we've talked about the idea that receiving feedback is just hard and that we do have conflicted feelings about it, that you're automatically going to have a triggered reaction of some kind, if not multiple kinds. And part of what I've learned over the past few years while working on this is not to decide whether I accept or reject the feedback right away, but first I have to just stay in the triggered reaction and better understand what the person's trying to tell me. And then I can sort, okay, what do I reject and what might be worth experimenting with? And it could be just 10%, right? That's worthwhile, but I then at least get the 10% of value out of their comment rather than finding something wrong with it so that I can reject it out of hand from the very beginning based on whatever I assume they're trying to say. And understanding what they're trying to say is complicated. As people are commenting in the chat, partly you're listening for tone, partly you're assuming from context, but what we're encouraging is actually have the conversation. Doug, don't overthink it. What would the going forward advice be to your friend who overthinks things? This isn't me, is it? Because I've been overthinking it while you were talking.
No, it's not you. You don't think about things enough.
Oh, okay. Let me write that
You don't
down.
have to worry about that problem. Your problem is that all your ideas are half-baked, so you have nothing to worry about.
That's fair. That's fair. But the going forward advice for don't overthink it is don't run away and stew about it and imagine the 100 things it could mean. Just have the conversation and say like, oh, wow, that's interesting. Say more about what you see me doing, going backwards, or what you think I should do instead, and in what situations. Okay, so now the last thing we want to add to your toolbox is a way to ask for feedback that will be more likely to get you something useful and also kind of lower the stakes on the feedback. And the key to this practice is, number one, don't say, hey, do you have any feedback for me? It's the question that we all gravitate to, but it's a really, really hard question to answer. People aren't sure about what, your personality, your performance. They also aren't sure how honest to be. And so instead of just asking, do you have any feedback for me? The key here is to ask for one thing. So these first 3 words are the key to this practice. what's one thing? You can finish the sentence any way that makes sense in the context you're in. It might be, what's one thing that you see me doing, or maybe it's something I'm failing to do that you think is getting in the way. Or it could be more specific. What's one thing that if I changed it, it would make a difference to you? Or it could be about a task that we do together. Like when we do our remote team meetings on Monday mornings, what's one thing that if we change it would make that meeting better from your point of view? But the key is just that what's one thing question, and a couple of traps to sidestep. One is, it's not, is there anything? Particularly in hierarchy, if you say, hey, is there anything that I should change? People below you hesitate to give you candid feedback. And so they'll be like, oh, no, you're perfect. Nothing, you're great. If you say, hey, what's one thing I could change that you think would make things better or make a difference to you? They hear that you're asking them, please tell me, I want to hear it. I want the coaching. And because you're only asking for one thing, it sort of lowers the stakes. It's like whatever's off the top of your head, it might be a 2 or a 5 minute conversation or exchange, but it's something that we can do and sort of integrate into how we work together daily. One other thing that I will say is that as we're working remotely, using this practice actually maybe takes on even more importance. And as we're living together rather intensively in some cases, or separated from loved ones, this can be adapted to our circumstances too. When we are in person and we bump into each other in the hall or we join each other in a meeting, it's so much easier to just get a sense of how somebody's day is going, right? And to quickly catch up, gauge how they're doing, hear about what's on their mind and what they're concerned about. On Zoom, it's just, or whatever you're using, Teams, phone calls, etc. It's just harder to get a gauge for where people are at so that you can connect with them, and also so that you can solve problems at the pace we're having to solve them, given all of the uncertainty. Like we used to have 5-year and 10-year plans. Now we have like 5-minute plans or 5-day plans for like, we don't know. There's so much we don't know. We're having to learn and make it up as we go along and learn as fast as we can. And so integrating this into how we're working together and how we're staying connected, like how are you doing? What's one thing on your mind today? What's one thing that's keeping you up at night? What's one thing you're excited about? Or what's one thing you feel really good about how we delivered that yesterday? I think that this question can actually help us stay connected given the challenges of maintaining that human connection, to have those feedback conversations and learn together as fast as we can in the environment that we're in. Doug, is there anything that you would add to that? Did I underthink anything?
No, and just to say, because I know there's lots of countries and there's technology involved, when I said that you underthink things, that was a joke. I was joking.
Okay, fair enough. I knew that, but maybe not everybody did.
Right.
So we wanted to open up the floor for questions. And you can ask a question by raising your hand, and we'll call on you, and then I think we unmute you. But Anna, you can tell us if that's how this works. Mm-hmm. You can also toss your question into the chat, and whoever is not answering questions will try to kind of keep an eye on themes in the chat. So a couple of different ways for us to do that. So it looks like we have a couple of raised hands. Hold on.
Sheila, we can start while you're working on that.
Yep.
We got a question, actually a pre-question from a friend of ours who had taken a workshop last year, Roxanne. What do you do when the difficult thing, we talk a lot about difficult conversations where somebody is being difficult. What if the difficult factor in a conversation is the technology or Zoom? And of course, that's something that we're all struggling with now. And I guess my first piece of advice around that is that we just all have to be more patient with each other than we might normally expect that we need to be. Some people like technology and are good at it and are adept, and other people find it exhausting or they don't know what they're doing and they're on a steep learning curve. So there's Roxanne. It's just another big variable, and we sometimes do what we do in lots of situations, which is we assume everyone is like us. So Zoom is easy for me, so why are you complaining about it? Why is it so hard for you? Or why do you get so tired? Or why do you dislike it so much? And that's just, I'm making my point of view everybody's point of view, and that's not fair. So when we are using technology like this to communicate, we have to go slower, and we have to really bend over backwards to be thoughtful and just more patient, and to listen. What is it that's hard for you about this? Why is this hard? What can we do to make it easier for you? And of course, that's not going to solve all our problems, but I think being patient and listening is going to help a little bit.
So I'm going to grab a question off the chat, and then we'll go to Sonia, who will ask us a live question. So I'm just giving us a little time to get ready for Sonia to talk. One of the questions I just saw in the chat box that we get a lot is, how do I give negative feedback to someone who's junior than me? The companion question is, how do I give negative feedback to someone who is senior to me? And I think that the advice is similar in each case. And I'm going to back up to a particular slide, this one, because we talked about how to use this idea. In other words, feedback being sort of vague and general, a label, and then you need to ask questions looking backward or ask questions looking forward to better understand it when you're on the receiving end. But this is also useful for when you are getting ready to give feedback, because you're going to have a headline that jumps to mind, like, I just need you to be more, whatever, responsive, proactive, strategic. Whether you're giving it to a junior person or a senior person, you have a headline in your head. And before you have that conversation, I would sit down and jot down, okay, what is it looking backwards that I've observed? What impact is it having on the team? What examples could I give? What did I expect them to do that they didn't do or handled differently? What impact do I see it having on the project or the client or the customer? And by the way, looking forward, what is it that I'm suggesting that they change? Like, there are probably very specific small behavioral changes or expectations. Like, I would expect you just to acknowledge the email within an hour or 24 hours, whatever the expectation is. Maybe it's worth just stating that and saying, when I say be more responsive, I'm specifically talking about email, or I'm specifically talking about whether you're giving us a status update just so I know where things stand. So before you offer feedback, I would actually prepare using this map. And then when you open the question, you might want to start with, so listen, I wanted to talk about something I'm concerned about. And it's going to take some back and forth for us to untangle what's going on. I'm curious what's going on from your point of view. And then I would share the label, or I would share the observations backwards and the suggestion going forward, and then ask about their reactions. With someone above you, I would in particular start with, hey, I've noticed an impact. And I would think about an impact that they care about as much as I care about, which is that I think the team is maybe confused or is getting mixed messages. Here's what I think is producing that, and here's the suggestion I would have. What do you think of that? Is that possible? Or what's going on from your point of view? And that is the key, and then making sure it's a two-way dialogue. Let's go to Sonia for the next question.
Hi.
Hey, Sonia.
Hey. How can you, it's been brilliant, thank you, I've really enjoyed it. How can you listen to feedback and not apply whatever filters, whatever, problems you might be in your own head to it, so that you're hearing the actual feedback rather than the feedback filtered through your own, for want of a better word, prejudices?
Yeah, well, so that's a huge question and an important one. In a sense, the answer is you can't, right? In a sense, we all have our filters, we all have our way of seeing the world. But one big step forward you can take is just being aware of that, and starting to notice your patterns, right? So if someone says, where's your mask? And you think to yourself, why does everyone think I'm a bad person? And then if someone says, why are you wearing that outfit? And you think, and there's another person who thinks I'm a bad person. you can start to notice these patterns in ourselves, the ways that we tend to interpret things. So noticing is one thing that we can do, because by the way, neither of those comments had anything to do with being a good or a bad person, but we interpret things the way we interpret them. So the first thing is noticing. And then I think a second thing you could do is just ask something that we've been talking about all along, which is to say, so when you say that, help me understand what you mean by that. Help me, if my default, the feedback receiver, our default way of interpreting feedback is often to interpret it much more broadly than it was intended. And to help us narrow it, you could just ask. So give me an example of a situation that applies in. Is it this situation or that? And so the more narrow you can make it, the more focused it is, and the less your general sort of filters will get involved and distort it.
So I'm going to pick up one of the questions from the chat, and then we'll go to Kathy, who will ask it live. One of the questions that has come up in the chat is, what do you do when someone's either giving you too much feedback, or the feedback that they're giving, they don't really care about the tone or the content, etc. And those two felt like they went together in my mind in terms of some of the people in my life who are just a constant, fire hose of criticism, and some of that may reflect some of their own issues, right? So I guess one of the things that we want to reiterate is that getting good at receiving feedback doesn't obligate you to take the feedback. And chapter 10 of the Thanks for the Feedback book is actually all about boundaries and turning away feedback. Because I think if the feedback isn't helping and it's damaging the relationship or is damaging you in terms of your confidence, your interest in being in the relationship, your self-esteem, then actually having a boundary and being able to turn off that faucet is a really healthy and important choice. So we talk a little bit in that chapter about 3 kinds of boundaries. One is I don't need feedback about a specific topic or for a specific amount of time. And then a second, is that right, Doug? I'm trying to remember these. The second one is basically, I don't need any feedback from you. And I'll just let you know if that changes. So topic at a specific time might be, I'm well aware you don't like my fiance, and I need you to keep that, now that we are engaged, I need you to keep that to yourself. I'll let you know if that changes. Any feedback would be, your constant criticism of my fill in the blank, I think is not helping. And so I need you to see whether you can keep that to yourself, and you may need to also name a consequence. If you want to stay with us over the holidays, this is assuming we can get together at holidays, we'd like to think about that, then I need you to keep it to yourself. The third boundary is maybe the most stark, which is that if you can't, then I don't think this relationship is working for me, and I'm going to have to exit the relationship. And there are, variations on what that means based on the relationship, but I actually think that that's a really important and healthy choice. And I think we worried a little bit that this book would be heard as like, stay in the relationship and you have to take anything anybody throws at you indefinitely. And we both feel really strongly that is not the case.
And I'd add one thing to that, which now just popped out of my head. So wait, if you give me 2 seconds, I'll think of it. I remembered it. So I asked the person, what's your purpose in giving me this feedback? And they'll say, oh, I want to make you a better writer or a better presenter or whatever. And then I say, okay, so for me, this feedback, the feedback you're giving me is not helping me do that. It's actually undermining. You're trying to make me more confident, which I appreciate. When you give me this kind of feedback, it undermines my confidence and makes me less confident. So when you're thinking about whether to give me feedback, now you at least have the information that when you say that, it makes things worse for me. And that at least gives the other person the information they need to make a better choice.
Yeah, that's really important. That was worth waiting for.
I know. I'm going to forget a couple more things because I think it's effective.
Okay, excellent. Let's go. Let's go to Kathy.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Oh, beautiful. Okay. Yeah, so I think what I've had happen sometimes is I give feedback and then I get a sort of rageful, angry reply, and their emotions are so high, the discussion can't be productive. So how do I sort of back away but not back down, because maybe the feedback still needs to be heard?
Yeah, I would. So a couple thoughts. One is certainly to back away in the moment, because probably you're not going to be able to have the conversation, and there's no point in plowing through it if neither party is going to be able to listen to the other. And a second thing you can do is just to name the dynamic, to say, and again, not in that moment, but to say, sometimes there's feedback that I want to give you. And I've noticed in the past, when I give it to you, you get really angry and then we can't have the conversation. So what's your advice to me when I have that feedback for you? What's your advice to me about how I might share it in a way that we can really talk about it? So you're just literally describing what happens and you're asking for their input. And your implicit or explicit is you're saying it is important for us to talk about this. So the fact that you get angry isn't enough reason for us not to talk about it. Although there may be things that you can coach me on that really help me get through to you without making you angry.
Yeah, so I'll pick up and tie that thought, Doug, to a question we have in the chat from Andre, who says, how do we make people focus on the positive things we say in feedback and think constructively on the negative things instead of using the negative points as a trigger to sadness or anger, et cetera? And I think that what I would add, Doug, to what you said is also that it's a joint challenge. So in other words, in terms of reacting to feedback, the negative will always get a bigger reaction than the positive, partly because it just triggers the adrenaline reaction, the threat reaction, and there isn't sort of an appreciation emergency that we ever have. That we don't have a system that reacts that strongly to positive information. And so that's part of the challenge, which is that you might be talking to someone and like they're doing 95% of the job really well, and there is 5 or 10% that needs work, and that feedback is important to give them, particularly if they want to move to the next role or make it easier for the team to work with them. And yet every time you bring that up, they just hear it as criticism or evaluation rather than coaching. And it's like they lose sight of, they don't have the right balance, right? They think like, you're telling me I'm terrible. And I think I would just share that as a joint problem. Like say, listen, I want to talk about something that I think we could change and improve. And I don't want to lose sight of the fact that you're doing all of these other things well. And even in the middle of the conversation, you can say that. Like, I feel like you're hearing this as you're a failure or something, and that is not at all actually my sense of what I'm trying to communicate to you. So let's talk about that, your reaction to it, and how we keep a balanced sense of what we're talking about.
Something I add to that is just that you can inquire sometimes about the positive side of the feedback when you're giving it. So I was in a conversation about a week ago with someone who was saying, nobody thinks I'm doing a good job. And I said, well, I think you're doing a good job. And then she said, well, but nobody thinks I'm doing a good job. And so I literally just paused and I said, okay, just want to pause on what I'm saying, which is, I think you're doing a good job. Tell me, when I say that to you, how do you interpret that? What does that mean to you? Do you believe it? Do you not believe it? And we started talking about that. And in talking about that, she started to get a little bit of clarity, like, oh, that's a real thing. That's not just the feedback sandwich of you're doing a good job, here's all the terrible things you do, and you're doing a good job. You actually mean it. And so spending a little time on that, not just asserting it, but actually saying, how do you hear that? What does this mean to you? Turns out to be useful often.
Let's go to Irene next, and I'll set, while we're unmuting Irene, I will just say something about the sandwich, because we often get asked what we think about the idea of a feedback sandwich. Say something positive, say something, slip in something negative quickly, and then end with something positive. And I think that that's well intentioned, and the intention is to give someone a balanced perspective. The problem with it is that we don't tend to use it until we have something negative to say. And then the positives are like padding that aren't genuine or specific or experienced as authentic, because they're just a delivery mechanism for the meat of the sandwich. And so we're not fooling anybody with it. If you have genuine positive things to say, have a conversation about how to help them have a balanced perspective about what you're saying, but don't use it. So you're doing a great job. Here are the 7 things I need you to do differently. But anyway, you're doing a great job. Like that's like white bread. It has no nutritional value. And everybody knows that what's important about the sandwich is the meat of the sandwich. So it's an idea that I think often gets misused and then has a negative impact. Should we go to Irene?
Yeah.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can. Tell us where you're calling in from.
I'm calling from California.
Yay. Welcome.
Yeah. Thank you for the great tips. I just wanted to ask about trust and how important it is in, giving feedback and also receiving feedback. And should you sometimes maybe work on the trust between you? If you want to give a feedback to someone, should you first work on the trust between both of you and then give the feedback? Or is there a link? And is feedback the most effective when trust actually exists between 2 people?
Yeah, it's so interesting to think about what does trust mean in a feedback context. Irene, do you want to say a little bit about what would it mean for you to trust someone as they give you feedback?
I guess if I do trust someone and they're giving me feedback, I wouldn't take it as badly if I do trust that they do want my best. So even if the feedback is negative, the first reaction would be kind of, I don't want to hear anything negative, but then next it would be, what is in that feedback that could be helpful to me, versus someone who I don't trust. I think that I would react more negatively and it would be less effective to get that feedback from that person, because I would question their true intention.
Yeah, their motives. When I hear people say, I just don't trust them, sometimes I hear what you're saying, which is what they mean is, I don't think they have my best interests at heart. Meaning, like they literally want to undermine me or sabotage me, or sometimes it means their interests are still just more important than my interests. So they want me to do it this way because it's good for them, not necessarily because they care about whether it's good for me. They don't want to do something bad to me, but they're not actually wanting to do something good for me. So it's about motivation and whether you think that they're on your side. Another way that I hear the word trust used is just about credibility. Like, do I trust they know what they're talking about? Do I trust that this is a credible source, or that it would work, and that what I'm getting is wisdom? It doesn't sound like wisdom. And so I think the question of trust is right. Almost everybody says, I have like an approved list of feedback givers who I trust. It's a very short list. And so I think what's been interesting, and if you have it, great. And if you think you have it with someone else when you're offering them feedback, fantastic. You may or may not actually be on their list. But part of the challenge of receiving feedback is that we also get and need feedback from everybody else in the world who we don't necessarily like or trust or know well enough or are sure they know what they're talking about. And so sometimes these are skills that say, well, even from those people, can I dig to find something that might be valuable in what they're saying? Would you add anything, Doug? And I'm going to shut my door, which just blew open.
I would just add that one of the best ways to build trust, I think the tendency when we want to build trust is to say, well, I'm a good person, you should trust me. And that doesn't really have any impact. It doesn't have much content to it because everyone thinks they're a good person. You should trust them. One of the best ways to really build trust is not to assert that they should trust you, but to say, it's really important to me to feel like you trust me. And so I want to work to earn your trust. And one way I can do that is if I feel comfortable that when you feel like I'm doing or saying something that runs afoul of trust or seems off or untrustworthy, that I want you to call it out. I want you to mention it to me so that we can talk about it and so that I can work on it. So you're making it an explicit conversation, and you're inviting their distrust explicitly, which paradoxically can have the impact of helping to build trust, because you're not just sort of requiring it, you're trying to earn it in a good way.
Thank you.
Roxanne had written a comment in
note.
the comments all the way back.
Yeah. Let's try Anastasia. And Roxanne, if you want to put in the chat box what we didn't answer from your question. Anastasia, can we hear you?
Hello.
Hello. Where are you calling from?
I'm from Moscow, and I was at your PON program last
I remember.
summer.
Yeah, I remember.
Yeah. So I knew this exercise for quite a while, and I was curious about your thoughts of the image of perfect feedback giver. I give you my experience. So I tried to ask this question about one negative or just a piece of advice from my trusted feedback givers. And actually I was not successful. Only three of them gave me the feedback. And these were ladies over 70. So for me, it turned out that it was connected with age, that those who are older are willing to give a piece of advice or something. But other of my friends, my good friends, and I'm sure they wish me best, they just refuse to share anything that could hurt me. So what would be your choice of people to whom you would go for feedback?
Doug, you want to take that one?
Yeah, well, so were these conversations in person, one-on-one, or were they by, how are you approaching people?
One by one, yes. So I had a very challenging personal period some time ago. So it was perfect timing when I met a lot of friends one-on-one. So we had long conversations, and I found that it was the right time to share everything we could, so that I could improve something in myself. But something went wrong.
Yeah, so I have two thoughts. If someone doesn't want to give you feedback, well, first of all, of course, you're not demanding feedback, you're inviting it. So you have to make it clear that it's up to them. But if you invite feedback and they say, nah, I just want to be supportive, you can make that a conversation and say, so help me understand, clearly I can't be the world's only perfect human being. So help me understand what is hard for you, or what the barrier is about giving me feedback. Are you worried that it will upset me or hurt our friendship, or that I won't be able to take it? And then hear what their reasoning is, and then talk about it. If they say, yeah, I don't think, you haven't handled it well in the past, you can say, well, so here's how I want to address that, or here's how I'm different. And it gives you a better chance to persuade them that you really mean it, and that it really will be useful. A second thing you could do is to ask in the hypothetical format. So if you ask for feedback and they say, nah, I don't want to give you any, you could say, well, don't give me feedback, but or don't give me feedback from you, but sort of hypothetically, if someone were thinking about me in this situation, what kind of feedback do you think someone might offer? And it just puts it at one level removed, and it sometimes, for whatever reason, makes people enough that it makes that little bit of difference that people then can say, well, sometimes people in your situation, are being too, whatever it is. And then you just translate it, obviously, and try to apply it to yourself.
I would also just say that often the people who are really best placed to offer you suggestions, coaching, are the people that you're working with day in and day out. right? Whether they're peers or subordinates or bosses, and you could make it specific to the task or the projects you're working on together. Hey, what's one thing that if I changed it would make it easier here, or you think would make this better? So that it's very tied to the collaboration and the work that you're doing together. And also they may not have an answer right away, and that's okay. And then they're also gauging how well did you respond. I didn't want to take the risk to tell you the most honest thing because I worried about your reaction, but I told you something sort of less risky. And then they're seeing, did you listen? Were you curious? Did you try it? And then you're building that trust over time, which a number of people in the comment section are talking about, trust being a process over time that sometimes you just can't rush. Let's take a question. And Anastasia, it's great to see you, even if just two-dimensionally. Let's go to Rahina and see if we can fit in one last question quickly. Hey, Rahina, where are you calling from?
I'm calling from Canada.
Where
Hi
in
to all of
Canada?
our Canadian friends.
Yeah, we're good over here. Things are all right. So I had a question along these lines. I actually pre-sent it to you, so I'll just read it out. The fact that people are triggered seems to make feedback, or the concept of feedback, wander into mental health. Can you speak to giving feedback to someone you suspect is struggling with their mental health? So it doesn't have to be about their mental health, but instead, say it's a piece like a workplace competency, but you suspect this person is struggling with anxiety or depression. Could you comment on that?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And we'll just give a couple of thoughts before we have to close. One of the things is really to ask for their coaching about how to support them and how to work together and try to do the best work we can while being aware that they're maybe having a hard time. More generally, we talk in the section about the challenge of being me about understanding your own profile, and there are some questions you can ask yourself to give other people advice on how to offer you feedback. But if you flip that around, you can also ask those questions of the person, like, when I have a suggestion, what would be helpful to you? Or what do you think would help right now in terms of how we're going to get through this project together, et cetera. And so it really has to be a dialogue. And you're right that we worry about triggering either more anxiety or more depression and discouraging them during this time. Doug, what would you add? So you're kind of taking things from them.
Yeah, a slightly more oblique angle on it is if you suspect that someone is struggling, one way to deal with that is just to ask them, of course. But another thing you can do that can really help is to just share your own challenges, either in the moment or in the past. You know, if you're thinking like, well, this person is isolating and they seem to be really struggling with it, rather than saying, well, tell me more about how you're struggling with it, you can share in a more open way than maybe feels comfortable in that relationship, the kinds of things you've been struggling with. And that will give them permission often to share with you and build some trust and normalize the sense that this is not so crazy and uncommon, but that it's this happens to human beings, and human beings can talk about those things.
So this is a good place for us to land because it ties back, of course, to the moment that we're in, where people have a lot going on in their lives, whether that's financial struggle and worries, or health worries, or family members and friends with health concerns. And so just checking in and connecting on how are you doing and where are you at, and then how do we sort of step in and support each other while we try to get some things done together, is really a feedback conversation in all directions.
Yeah.
So we're so delighted that everyone has joined us. It's great to see people at least two-dimensionally. We hope we see you three-dimensionally in Cambridge sometime soon. And I'll turn things back to Susan.
Yeah, thank you all.
Thank you, Doug Stone and Sheila Heen, so much for this wonderful talk. And thank you to all of you out there in your different time zones, in your many different countries, for participating in this way. We have more events like this coming up. including next week a film series event where you can watch a documentary film and then join an international group discussing the film. It's all on the program on negotiation at Harvard Law School website under events. So live from PON, thank you so much and goodbye.